Hi, I'm Rhonda Buss, and I'm going to walk you through a wonderful pattern. It's the Colette Clover Pant pattern. When I got this pattern, I absolutely enjoyed it so much because it's just kind of a feast for the eyes. It has this lovely little stitching line on the side. It opens up like a book. Each of the pages flip, making it very easy to follow along as you work through the process of putting the pants together. And then something that I thought was really fun is in the back, there's a nice little envelope where you can store your pattern once it's all finished. And then you just close it with the tab in the back and nicely and neatly put it away. The Clover Pant pattern, it's a straight leg pattern. It's rather fitted. One of the things that I was very happy about is how well it fit, but we'll get to that in our next video. Today I'd like to talk to you though about the type of fabric that you should choose to make the pant with. Here's one pair that I've made. It's a cotton lycra. I think it has maybe about 3% lycra mixed with the cotton. It's a great little summer pant. Now, one thing I do want to tell you is that the pant is designed with pockets. It has two little pockets I'll show you with the next pair. This particular pair I decided to not put the pockets in. If you leave the pockets out, it gives a much flatter look across the stomach. The other pair I did, these are actually a pair of wool pants with lycra. They fit, like I said, very nicely. These I did put the pockets in. The pockets are great, especially if you're out shopping and you want a place to stick your cell phone, maybe a little bit of change or a couple of dollars. It's very nice, but you can see that that would add just a little bit of extra bulk to the front of your pants. So that's something that you can choose to add or not add, and we'll talk about the construction of that in a later video. As far as fabric choice is concerned, one of the things that I would do is, because of the fact that the pants should be made with some fabric that has stretch to it, making the pants out of muslin is not going to be such a great idea because you're not going to get the same fit that you'll get if you have fabric that has some lycra stretch to it. So my suggestion would be to buy a piece of fabric that is inexpensive or that you got on sale for a great price, but has a lot of stretch to it. This is a stretch denim, and you can see that it really stretches quite nicely. This would make for a great first muslin pair. And if they fit the first time, fabulous, then you've got a great pair of pants. I showed you the wool version that I made. This also has stretch to it, but not nearly as much as the stretch denim does. So my suggestion would be to get something that has a really nice stretch, not a knit, but something with cotton and lycra, and then move on. Once you get a good fit, then move on to a fabric that doesn't have as much stretch to it. Next, we're going to talk about how the pants fit. Now, the first thing I'd like to say about pants is pants are actually quite easy to make. And before anyone sends me any nasty letters about that, the sewing of them is quite easy. The issue that we all have is fitting the pants. For myself, I have a nice set of hips and I'm a little bit round in the hips, so usually when I make a pair of pants, if I don't do a little bit of adjusting ahead of time, they're a little bit tight in the thighs. I have my back end is a little bit round, but I've been making pants long enough to know that these are my issues. With the Colette pattern, I was really quite happy because I made very, very few adjustments to the pant. On the front, the only adjustment I made is I lengthened out the crotch just a bit. And on the back, because of the roundness that I told you that I have, I did increase the back at center back by 1.5 inches, and I also added a little bit into the crotch. Now the pants are intended to be a little bit on the cropped side, and I did not want a cropped pant. I wanted my pants to really break right at my ankle. I wanted to be able to wear them with pumps as well as with flats. So what I did is, rather than cut the pant on the line that was appropriate for my size, I just left the entire length. And I would suggest doing this. Remember, you can always cut it off. It's a little bit more difficult or impossible to put it back. So leave the length and then make your adjustments once you have your muslin made. Now, like I said, making pants is quite simple, and the Colette pattern spells out the process really quite well, but the issue, of course, like I said, is fitting. Now, on the Sew News website, you can find lots of resources for pants fitting. There is a little search bar at the top of the web page where you can just type in pant fitting, and up will come lots of articles on ways that you can adjust your pattern. At the top of the Sew News website, you can also find a bar, and in that bar is a link to the blog. Click on the blog, and when you do, that will take you to lots of resources that we have provided for pants fitting. Our next phase of working with the pants will be the actual construction phase. Today we're going to talk about the markings on your pattern and actually putting the pants together. The first thing that you need to think about is what markings that you really need to pay attention to. And really and truly, we really should pay attention to everything. There is a dot for the end of the zipper. This pair of pants, the zipper is on the side seam, not in the center back. If you do decide to put the pockets in the pants, pay close attention to the dots that are here. What I do is, I don't really mark my dots. I just clip my pattern so that actually, once this is pinned to the fabric, I've clipped the fabric and the pattern at the same time, and then I know exactly where those dots should be. There's also a little notch here on the front pant. Now on the back pant, there is a tiny little zipper, or excuse me, not a zipper, but a dart. And this dart it's a nice little dart, especially for the roundness of our backside. And if you'll remember, I actually added on a little bit for my roundness. So you might think, well, what do I do with the dart? No big deal, just extend the dart, and then I make the little clips here so that I know where the top of my dart is. And then you can see here, I put a dot here where I can do a tailor tack or mark the point of my dart with a marking pen. And you can also mark the dart with a tracing wheel and tracing paper. So once we have all of our markings done, our pants are cut and our markings have been done, then it's time to start putting the pants together. The only place on the pant that it requires a little bit of interfacing is on the facing. And because of the fact that, remember, this has, our fabric should have some lycra stretch to it, I like to use an interfacing that is a knit interfacing so that it will move with the fabric that we're using. It's very lightweight, has a nice little fusible on the back, works great with this type of a garment. So I also showed you on the pant about the markings of the pockets. The pockets would have the same markings to correspond with the little dots that were on the pattern. You can see them here. I'll put them against this fabric so you can see it a little bit better. But if you remember, there was a notch that told us that this was the front of our pant, and on either side was where our pockets should line up with the facing. So what you want to do is sew the pocket onto the facing first. You'll do that to the facing as well as the pant, because the pockets have been also notched here and sewn. Once you have that done, then we need to sew our facing to our two facings, the back facing and the front facing, together. Simple to do. And of course we'll want to press our seam allowance open. Lucky me, the iron actually matches my fabric. Can't get any more coordinated as a seamstress. All right, so once that's together, let's just put that aside for now. And we've already put the pocket onto our pant, on both sides. What I do is I sew up my crotch seam as well as my side seam. I should have shown you this one first. So the side seam is sewn together, the crotch seam is sewn together. On this side, I've left the side seam open because I need to add my zipper. Now, you know, there's lots of ways that you can put a zipper into a garment. You can hand pick it, which of course is beautiful, but a little bit time consuming. You can do a center applied zipper, but what looks really nice in something like this is an invisible zipper. And of course an invisible zipper is one that when it comes together, it just looks like the seam. You don't see any stitching at all. So most people say that you should use an invisible zipper foot. I don't know if I'm just lazy or what, but I never do. What I do with my zipper, and I'll show you, is I unzip it first, and you'll see that the coils are rolled to the inside. So the first thing that I do is I take my zipper, I've unzipped it, and I roll the coils in, and I press the coils out. Don't leave the iron on for a long period of time or you're going to melt the coils. But now you can see they're nice and flat. Do that to both sides. Now if you'll notice with the zipper, there's like a nice little guideline, a stitching line here. You might need to be like me and put a pair of glasses on to see it, but that works really well as a guideline for sewing the zipper into your garment. So you'll take your fabric, and one thing that you need to think about, and this is something that I always do, is I lay the zipper on so that I know that I'm sewing it correctly. So now I know that the teeth should come in. Then I take the zipper to my machine. And I want to place the needle right into that line. I hold it down. And slowly stitch right along. And you see that the presser foot actually rides on top of the zipper. And now that I've sewn that, of course you would do it the length of the zipper and do it to the other side as well. But your zipper is in. You didn't have to have a special zipper foot for attaching the invisible zipper, and it always works. Just take your time. It's how I put invisible zippers in all the time, so I know that it works. So once your zipper is in, then you can come back to your pant and finish sewing up your side seam. Once the side seams are together, then what you want to do is take your pant and put one leg inside the other. Excuse me. They should be, one side, the right side should be out. So you put your arm in, put it inside. And then match up your crotch. Sew your crotch seam. Once your crotch seam is sewn, then you can come back and you can attach your pockets to the top of the pant. Now, when you're attaching the pockets, what you want to do, and this part is just a little bit tricky, so you just have to pay attention. Match your pocket up and make sure that they are matched, really matched. And what you're going to do is you're going to sew, by the way, I didn't say this before, but all the seam allowances, unless they're specified on this pant, are 5/8 of an inch. So you'll find your 5/8 inch mark and sew all the way around. So you'll sew from this stitching line around to this other stitching line to sew your pocket in. And once you've done that, that's what makes this so nice on the inside. So you sew your pocket in, and then after the pocket is sewn in, then you sew the rest of the facing onto the pant. So your zipper is in, your pants are all together. So our final step will be to talk about finishing. There are lots of ways to finish things. We don't really have to finish them at all. That's one train of thought, that who's going to see the inside anyway other than me? But I know for myself that there's nothing nicer than pulling on a garment that's beautifully finished on the inside. It makes you just feel really good about what you've made. Now, with finishing this garment, there are, of course, you can serge your seams, makes for a very nice finished edge. For the facing, you can either press the facing down and finish the edge with a seam binding. This is just a purchase seam binding that you can get at your local fabric store. And what I did, in order to save myself a little bit of time, I actually stitched this down. You can't see it from the front side because I stitched right in this little ditch here. So that made it a very quick application. Now the only problem here is when you get to the pocket, in order to stitch that facing down, you're going to have to hold your pocket back because you don't want to end up catching the edge of your pocket as you stitch down that facing. But it's really not that big a deal. It's a very easy thing to do. And then bind the edge, and like I said, you can just buy a purchase seam binding from your local fabric store. And you can see here with the pocket, I have not finished them yet. It's very easy to come back in and finish the edge of these with the seam binding, but you can see, they're fraying. It doesn't look so nice. It's not the biggest thing in the world, but once they're finished, it just looks so much nicer on the inside. With the facing, you can also, what I did here, and remember with this pair of pants, I did not put the pockets on the front of these pants. So what I did is I just turned my facing under, and if I pull it back enough, you can see that it's just hand stitched down. Before I did that though, what I did with the top of my facing is I pressed it, and then you can maybe see, I hope you can, that there's just a fine little stitching line here. I love to do edge stitching. I think that it gives a garment just a nice little extra touch. So once I stitched that down, now I could have folded the seam or the facing back and I could have stitched this all down at one time, but just me being a little bit persnickety, I didn't want my stitching on the inside to be a little crooked, so I preferred just to stitch it down by hand. It's always nice to add a little hook and eye to the top of your pants. With your zipper, more than likely it's going to stay shut, but in the off chance it doesn't and you don't want a wardrobe malfunction, add a little hook and eye. You can see here I've done the little embroidery stitch around this. Instructions for these are very easy to find. It's just something that I like to do. Rather than adding the eye, what I like to do is add thread chain. It just makes for a nice little flatter finish and holds together really quite well. And like I said, you can find those instructions, and we should have a link to those on our blog as well, to where you can find instructions on doing the little decorative stitch and doing the thread chain. Now, when I talked about this, I said that you could buy the seam binding at your local fabric store, but sometimes you can't find one that really matches your fabric. And I'll show you here, I also did a seam binding on the hem of my pant because it just made for a very pretty little finish. And I decided I would prefer for this to match my fabric. So that's very easy to do, and it's actually something that I absolutely love doing. I love making seam binding. You can do contrasting seam binding, all kinds of things. So in order to make seam binding, there is a machine that you can get that presses it and you put it through and it presses it all at the same time. But I like to use a bias tape maker. These come in an assortment of sizes, so you can actually have an entire collection. This one makes a 1/2 inch seam binding. This one I've already pressed, so you can see how nice it looks. The bias tape, or whenever you cut this, it needs to be cut on the bias, and I'm going to show you one of the nice things about this is if you take your iron and you turn this, it actually has a curve to it. Now the nice thing about bias is it's very forgiving. So remember we have our pockets and there are 2 curved edges there. So if you want, you could curve a little bit of it. It just makes it nice. Makes it a little bit easier for sewing the binding to the edge of the pocket. But if you get a little bit too carried away and you've got this into too much of a curve, all you need to do is put your iron here and you can straighten it all back out again. So in order to do this, like I said, you need to cut the strips on the bias. And with this fabric, you can see this is the straight of grain of my fabric. And here is where I cut my bias strips. So, and my pressing board gives you a good idea of what the bias is. So this is actually the stretchiest direction of the fabric. And that's what gives you all the opportunities to be able to mold this so well. So always make sure you cut it on the bias grain line of the fabric. So in order to get it to look like this with the nice little folded edges, all you need to do. Now, one thing I'll show you here too is sometimes your fabric is just not long enough and you have a very long edge that you want to apply the bias tape to. So all you do is just sew it together, and your seam lines your seam lines will be at an angle like this. So don't think that they should be straight. they should be at an angle so that the fabric will lay straight. So take your little bias tape maker and put the strip through here. I've cut this strip 1 inch wide. Pull it through, and you can see because of the little lips on either side of this, it already starts doing the work for you. So it's really a very nice thing. The only thing that I'll warn you about if you've never done this before is if you have your iron on a full steam, you can scorch your fingers as well. But just be careful. And that's it. Very easy to do. So now you can always coordinate your bias tape to whatever garment that you have. Now, in order to sew the bias tape onto your garment, you'll see once it's been pressed, you have a nice little ditch here. And of course, I have a contrasting fabric here just so it makes it a little bit easier for you to see. So we'll take it over to our machine and we're going to stitch right in that little ditch, line up the two edges, the edge of our fabric and the edge of the bias tape that we've made. And then we're going to stitch right in that ditch. And I'll just sew a little bit just to show you. So, bring it back over to our pressing pad. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get rid of that fold that's on the other side, and you'll see why in just a moment. And we're going to press this out. Now, take this and fold it over, and this is exactly how I did the edge of my facing as well as the edge of my pant leg. So we'll put that over, and you can see on this side it actually overlaps that seam. So now take it back to our machine. Line the needle up exactly where that fold line is right there. Put your needle in. And stitch right in that little ditch. So now that's stitched down. The back side is unfinished, but we don't care about that because when this is hemmed up, that's what we're going to see. We'll see this pretty little finished edge, and when we slide our leg into that pant, we'll feel very good about the little extra effort that we went to finish the seams in such a beautiful way. Thank you for joining me in the sew along for the Colette Clover pant pattern. I hope you enjoy your new pants.